Hello everyone, and hope you're having a great day wherever you are. This is JoRoSaR, and I'm going to be walking you guys through today the basics of building a Warlock Murloc deck. A particularly cheesy build, if I can borrow the phrase from StarCraft, that you might sometimes see people playing on the ladder. It's a kind of deck that you see in Hearthstone that has a single purpose. It needs to kill you, and it wants to kill you very, very early on in the game. A lot of the time, if you're not able to kill your opponent outright really quickly with a Murloc deck, the deck will just lose in the late game. There is almost no investment. In fact, more often than not, there's just no investment in the late game whatsoever. But my gosh, is it a fun deck to play. So I wanted to go over sort of the basics and what you kind of need to build a Murloc deck. The majority of the cards that you need are reasonably cheap if you've been playing a lot of Arena or you've been grinding some gold from doing quests and you have a decent amount of gold in the bank. You probably have opened a reasonable number of Murlocs just from the common cards you've been playing. So if we start off, what I've done here is I've taken a look at the neutral cards and I've just done a quick search for Murloc so you guys can see what cards we have to choose from here. We've got the Grimscale Oracle, just a 1/1 for 1 mana, and all other Murlocs have 1 attack. Note that this isn't a battle cry, by the way. I'll get back to this in a second, which means you can play this and play another Murloc afterwards, and it would still have that +1 attack, so useful to know. Murloc Raider 2/1, pretty standard. You've probably seen this a million times before. I'm going to skip ahead here and show you as well the Bluegill Warrior here, which is 2/1 with charge, but of course costs an extra mana to play. There's then the Murloc Tidecaller over here in the top right, which more often than not tends to be one of the first cards you can play if you get a chance to, because whenever a Murloc is summoned, gain +1 attack. So all the Murlocs that you summon after this little guy here will contribute to him being pretty buffed up later on. You've then got the Tidehunter, which is doubly useful when used in conjunction with the Tidecaller because your battle cry is to summon a 1/1 Murloc Scout. So you're basically summoning 2 Murlocs for the price of 1 there. You then have the Cold-like Oracle, which it can be a little bit of a double-edged card because it does give your opponent a bit of card draw. Its battle cries each player drawing 2 cards. So great when you're in a bind and you want to kill them off very quickly early game, but don't forget you're giving your opponent options as well with this card. And then we've also got the Cold-light Seer here, whose battle cry is giving all other Murlocs +2 health. Now, important note here, and often can be hilarious whenever you meet another Murloc deck on the ladder and you didn't realize this before, give all other Murlocs. That includes your opponent's cards, guys. If your opponent has Murlocs on the board, it will give all of them +2 health as well, so just remember that. Flipping over to the next page, this is possibly my favorite Murloc card. It's the Murloc War Leader, because you put it down and all other Murlocs have +2/+1. Frankly, that's just insane. This is my favorite card to be able to play, possibly the one that a lot of opponents just dread seeing because it just buffs everything else on the board, and it doesn't matter if you summon other Murlocs afterwards. It's not a battle cry. All other Murlocs are +2/+1. But like with, if we look on the previous page, like with the Cold-like Oracle, Cold-light Seer rather, give all other Murlocs +2 health. All other Murlocs have +2/+1. So again, this does buff your opponent's Murlocs as well. Be warned of that. And finally, the legendary Murloc, the only legendary Murloc, Old Murkai. It's charge and has +1 attack for each other Murloc on the battlefield. Basically a glorified charge Murloc, but can be really, really powerful once you get a couple more on the board. So that's kind of that as far as an introduction to the Murlocs are concerned. I am, for the sake of saving time here, going to pick a couple that I know I'm going to want in my deck. I love the Tidecaller. There are many ways, by the way, to build one, so do not stick hard and fast to what I'm going for here. But I really like the Tidecaller, so I'm going to stick 2 of them into this deck straight away. The Tidehunter as well, particularly good, and I like the Grimscale Oracle. I might come back for those guys later, but I definitely want both Murloc War Leaders and Old Murkai. This is going to form the base of who I want in my Murloc deck. I'm going to add some other ones in here now, but I might end up taking them out later. The Bluegill Warrior with charge can be very, very useful for aggression. Murloc Raider, pretty standard. Not 100% certain I want this. Cold Light Seer, yes, it gives all other Murlocs 2 health, but also it doesn't really help the attack very much. This is useful defending against any sort of area of effect damage that you think your opponent might come out with, for example. So for now, I'm going to go with the Murloc Raider, and even though it's a double-edged sword, I'm going to add 2 Cold Light Oracles as well. And heck, let's just add 2 Cold Light Seers. I can always take them out in a bit. What I want to do now, though, is take a look at the other non-Murloc cards. So the card you see on the screen that isn't a Murloc is the Hungry Crab. It shows up when I search for Murloc because it has the word Murloc in its description. Its battle cries, destroy a Murloc and gain +2/+2. Now, obviously, that synergizes really well with a Murloc deck. And if you happen to destroy one of the Murlocs that doesn't have a secondary effect, like a Murloc Raider, that could actually end up being really good. Imagine on a turn, you attack with the Murloc Raider, you attack their hero, manage to do some damage to their character, and then immediately play the Hungry Crab so they don't have an opportunity to kill it off, and then you absorb that. That might be a thing, especially if it's buffed as well. I believe you, Actually, no, pardon me, if it's buffed, you don't get it, but certain other cards, if it's buffed, you want to be keeping an eye out for that. Destroy Murloc and gain +2/+2, so that would immediately go to 3/4. Really useful to note there. But I'm not personally going to be including this card in my deck here, but you totally can consider it in yours. I'm now going to release the search and take a look at some Warlock-specific cards that we might want to consider in here. Soulfire deals 4 damage. The downside of that is it discards a random card. It does, however, get rid of a lot of mid-game cards that comes out. Let's say, for example, your opponent is going second and uses Coin on turn 3 to put down a 4-drop that's actually quite annoying to deal with because you haven't buffed up your Murlocs yet. Well, this could be the answer to that. I'm going to add 2 of those to my deck, but some people prefer not to have cards that discard other cards in their deck, so we'll keep that in mind. Mortal Coil, against anything your opponent chucks out early game, very, very useful indeed, especially for the card draw at the end, so I'm immediately taking 2 of those. Flame Imp on the bottom right is just a very good card. Yes, you're dealing 3 damage to your hero as a battle cry, but bear in mind, at the beginning of the game, when you're just trying to kill your opponent in a couple of turns, damage to your hero doesn't matter very much. You're trying to kill them, early damage shouldn't really affect you, so I'm happy to go for 2 of them here. This is only really a concern if you're sort of going into the late game and you're kind of in a position where it's turn 5, you're on 15 health, your opponent's on 30, and now we start the mid game. Yeah, that's a bad position to be in. But in a lot of situations, you want to be able to kill them outright by turn 5, so I'm okay with the Flame Imp here. Blood Imp used to be so good before they nerfed it, where it was stealth and all other minions had +1 health. Now, they've nerfed it. At the end of your turn, give another random friendly minion +1 health. It makes it less appealing a card as it was before, but I've still seen it used in a lot of Murloc decks. I've used it in my own. In fact, I still do occasionally when I'm playing around with stuff, so it's a card you should consider here. Power Overwhelming. Great card to use if you just need to get rid of a really good card, maybe a card with Taunt that you can't quite kill with one of your Murlocs, or basically need to sacrifice multiple Murlocs to kill off a card. This can be a very useful card to have, where you just use one of your Murlocs and one of your non-Murlocs, gets rid of whatever it is that's blocking your way, and powers your way to victory. And of course, if your opponent has nothing on the board stopping you, you can also play these to kill him or her off as quickly as possible. So I'm going to include 2 of them in my deck here. Other cards to consider on page 2 here. Voidwalker. A lot of people include this in their Murloc decks. I'm personally not that big a fan of it because I prefer to play ultra aggressive. I might actually end up losing one or two more games as a result of it, maybe, because I know some very high level players when they play Murloc decks love putting Voidwalkers in, but that's a personal preference. Drain Life occasionally is useful, dealing with anything that has sort of 2 life attached to it in the early to mid game. I'm thinking things like acidic swamp ooze and stuff like that. So keep that in mind there as a card to consider. Shadow Bolt, not really something I'm a big fan of. You could only deal 4 damage to a minion. It costs 3 mana as well. And we've got a couple of Soulfires to deal with that. Now, in the very, very early days of Murloc decks becoming a thing, summoning portals were actually a thing on the grounds that you would absorb damage from your opponent for several turns in a row, and then use a summoning portal, and summon all of the things at once. At one time it was a thing. Nowadays, we've basically learned that that doesn't really work anymore. Your opponents can use that time and have some decent cards at their disposal to basically stop your attack if you don't know what you're doing. Plus, you take a bit of damage in the meantime. So in my very early versions of this deck, I did have a summoning portal in it, but not anymore. Everything else tends to be a little bit too expensive. Twisting Nether, haha, you should never survive to use that, otherwise you're doing Murlocs wrong. So let's go ahead and take a look at the neutral cards. Right. Elven Archer, I guess kind of a staple, but we've got a lot of one-draw Murlocs for that, so I'm not particularly interested, if I'm perfectly honest. Abusive Sergeant could be an option, giving another Murloc +2 attack, but it's temporary, it is not permanent, so just bear that in mind. Leper Gnome. Now, Leper Gnome, in my opinion, just combines really well with Power Overwhelming, which is just so awesome there if you think about it. Give a friendly minion +4/+4, and then it dies. Well, guess what? Your death rattle here is 2 damage to the enemy hero. That's basically 6 damage you're doing there. So I find that really useful, and I like having the Leper Gnome there. It also means you have a non-Murloc to buff with the Power Overwhelming, so you don't get rid of one of the Murlocs on the board. So that's pretty cool as well. Shield Bearer, stalling for time. Well, you don't really need to stall for time if you're trying to kill them outright in the early game, so not something I am personally interested in. Young Priestess is an interesting card. At the end of your turn, give another random friendly minion +1 health, but it's got 2/1 attack as well. So after the nerf to the Stealth Imp there, I'd actually consider having at least one of these in my deck. I actually only have one at the moment, and I'm only going to be using one. I haven't actually used this in my deck previously, but I'm beginning to seriously warm to it. I really like the fact that they're there. And not too much else to mention here, other than both these cards, in my opinion, are really good fun. The Iron Beak Owl can be useful if your opponent plays an early taunt or tries to avoid dying by playing a creature with taunt. Ancient Watcher would be like the earliest example of something that can be quite useful in stalling for time. And silencing that minion just means that you can attack their throat that much faster. Knife Juggler, on the other hand, I don't really think I need to say much about it other than you're summoning an awful lot of minions, guys. So dealing a damage to a random enemy every time you summon something is just great. Both of these are great cards, and I'm not actually sure which one I'd pick for this deck at the moment. There is, however... Oh, and Nat Pagal, by the way. At the start of your turn, you have 50% chance to draw an extra card. Also a really good card. A lot of pros tend to use that. I'm 50-50 about it at the moment. I don't think there are that many turns to use it on, personally. So I prefer to go for other stuff. But if I just quickly move through over here... Where are you? There you are. Questing Adventurer. I love Questing Adventurer in this deck. Even if your opponent has a lot of ways to kill off what you're going to be doing, sure. They still need to focus on this. You have a lot of cheap cards that you're going to be losing here. Look at this, 15 1-drops, and every time you play one of them, you gain +1/+1. You even have cards that cost 0 mana. This, in my opinion, is just so much fun to play. So much fun to play. I'm actually going to add 2 of them right now. And there are just so many ways, little ways, to play the Murloc deck in terms of construction. Knife Juggler and Iron Beak Owl. You know what? I'm going to get rid of the Cold Light Oracle here. Just to put double Knife Juggler in, because it's... Actually, no. We'll put in one of each. We'll go Knife Juggler and Iron Beak Owl in the place of the 2 Cold Light Oracles. So I'm not giving my opponents any card draw. Loot Hoarder, also worth considering, because you can use it to Power Overwhelming, get rid of a high value card, or just do damage against their hero, and then you get to draw a card afterwards, so pretty convenient there as well. For now, though, I'm going to call this my Murloc deck, so you can take a quick look at what I've done over on the right-hand side. You've also sat with me through the process of making it, so you know exactly what goes into it. And like I've mentioned, there are a lot of cards I was talking about that could be included in this deck that I haven't, and you totally can. Play around with what you think works best. The meta is also changing quite a lot, so just go with what you like. And if you want an example of just how this could work, I'm just going to go into a practice game right now. Because subjecting someone immediately on the ladder to this just feels like a little bit of a waste. And also might enrage them as well. Let's not do that. Let's go ahead and pick a random class shaman. And we're just going to hopefully show you here what a typical game should look like.
Gul'dan versus Thrall.
For Doomhammer, your soul shall be mine.
Alrighty, so Flame Imp is a great starting card to have. I'm really happy with the Tidehunter as well. I'm less keen on the Ironbeak Owl because I don't have a reason to silence a minion yet, so I wonder if I can get something useful in place of that. However, I have got the power overwhelming, so I can summon the Ironbeak Owl and then go, well, if nothing else, I can always just use this on it and use it to do a lot of damage. But I'm just going to mulligan that for now. You probably don't have to. I'm just going to see what I can get. I'm going second, which, ooh, and I like this. I want to be able to summon the Tidecaller first. That makes me really happy. Whenever a Murloc is summoned, gain +1 attack. So I am, for better or for worse, going to use the coin on my first turn, play the Tidecaller, and get away with playing the Flame Imp as well. So yes, I've taken a bit of damage, and all of a sudden, things are going to get aggressive very, very quickly here. Summoning a totem doesn't particularly scare me and gives me a lot of time to do stuff. This is, of course, a regular computer, so not too much to worry. Now note, whenever Murloc is summoned, gain +1 attack. Well, ain't that convenient, because two of them are about to appear. And this is why the Tidehunter is pretty useful for this little guy here. So I'm just going to go ahead and get rid of the totem and do a bit of damage. And we'll see what ends up happening. Aha! Well, I don't actually need to kill off the creature with Taunt here. What I am going to do, though, on this turn, is play the Cold Light Seer. It gives all my other Murlocs +2 health. And conveniently, this means that an awful lot of my dudes are not going to die when taking apart this Frostwolf Grunt. Now, this is 4 attack. Don't really want to waste it there, so I'm going to go ahead and kill it off here with the Tidehunter. Conveniently still alive. Be able to hit you with everything else. And all of a sudden, at the end of turn 2, my opponent's already on 19 health. Alright. So he's going to be able to kill off the Flame Imp there with the charge. That's fine. Oh, and this could end up getting a lot of fun. 19 health. So I'm going to play the Questing Adventurer for lols. And I'm pretty certain next turn it's looking quite dire for my opponent. I can't quite use the power of Overwhelming to kill him off just yet, because that would be 4. So 4 and 4 is 8, 10, 11, 13. He's got 19 health. So I'm just going to go ahead and do this and possibly win on the next turn, unless something drastic happens right now. Imagine, yeah, this is basically a standard exactly how a game should go. A lot of ladder games do look like this as well, guys. I mean, your opponents might just not have the cards required, to be perfectly blunt, to be able to deal with this sort of damage this early on. So I'm going to go ahead and play that. Now, notice whenever you play a card, so we have got the additional summon of the Murloc Scout there. That does help the Tidecaller. It doesn't allow the Questing Adventurer to be 4/4. I'm going to go ahead and play Power Overwhelming on this guy because, frankly, 10-8 looks pretty awesome. The Questing Adventurer can go ahead and take out this guy, and as the killing blow, I will allow my Tidecaller, that good old staple of the Murloc deck, to deliver a one-hit knockout. Hooray! And there goes a victory. Now, you can imagine if a ladder season resets, for example, I tend to use a Murloc deck just to get from level 25 all the way up to level 10, give or take, really, really quickly, and then start using some of my more serious decks. There are many, many ways you can play it. Frankly, it's just fun to play as casual, even if you're not laddering seriously. Just a really fun little deck to try and go ahead and build. It doesn't cost that much in terms of dust. I've only used Old Murkai in this deck, and you know what? You don't even have to. You can replace Old Murkai with so many other non-legendary cards as well. It's just great fun to play, and I hope this video has allowed you to maybe have a little bit of a think about how you'd want to build your deck. So if you've got any suggestions, or perhaps some cards that I might not have mentioned here that you actually find really work for you, go ahead and let us know. Leave a comment on the video. Feel free to go ahead and tweet me as well. Follow me on Twitter at JoRoSaR. I'm also at facebook.com/JoRoSaR. And finally, don't forget, subscribe to the YouTube channel and you'll be able to see when I next post these Hearthstone videos. So hope you've enjoyed, guys. I've been JoRoSaR. Have a great evening.